Alright, class. Well, it's April 15th through the 20th this week, and it's a week on e-portfolios. And you'll submit an e-portfolio assignment by the end of this week. Already, though, we're close. This is the third to last week in the class, so we're very close to the end of class, only a couple more weeks after this to go. And let's just talk about some of the activities for this week. You're going to read in chapters, let's see, textbook chapter 22, and a little bit more about e-portfolios from hawaii.edu and JISC and then take a look at those. Kind of think about best practices for portfolio development and portfolio assignment development, because that's what you'll be assigned to do this week. And then there are presentations on using some of the tools that you might want to use for portfolio work. Wix, Weebly, Google Sites. These are choices that you can choose from. It's good to know about these, so take a moment to learn about these different types of tools if you haven't already, or if you don't have much knowledge of those tools. But to also remember that you can use other tools as well. There's other tools listed in the in the ePortfolio assignment that you can choose from. So take a look at that, and you don't actually have to create this assignment. It's kind of a different one. You just create the assignment, but you don't actually have to create an ePortfolio as part of the assignment. And actually, you don't have to implement this in a class. So if you're not in a classroom right now, that's okay. You can just create an assignment for ePortfolios for your class. So that's something to remember, that it's not something that requires you to try out in your class with students, or something that you have to reflect upon afterward. But it's more of you just creating an assignment for let's say a chosen class. Could be any class that you choose from. And what might an ePortfolio assignment look like if you were to submit one, or to create one that you want your students to submit in that class. Okay, so other things about this assignment. Well, let's first talk about just ePortfolios in general and what they're all about. So let me swap this here. So ePortfolios, and I got this information from a nice site here at Waterloo University in Canada, actually. So it's kind of nice to look at it. But an ePortfolio, what is it? It's a student-created digital collection of course-related work, and it may include essays, posters, photos, videos, artwork, assignments, whatever you want it to include. So obviously, if you're teaching a more creative, this kind of fits in, I think, a little bit more in the creative arts categories of learning, where students might share their creative works. But it is student created, and it is a digital collection of course-related work, whatever that work might be. Now, what if your course is not in the creative arts? Well, that's fine too. There are plenty of examples of portfolios, e-portfolios, that are work of a scientific nature or a literary nature, or other types of classes have had portfolios in them. But it's an opportunity for students to combine their work in a class, put it together in a nice portfolio format in one place to be shared. And this may also include student life information, such as work history, extracurricular, volunteer activities, and so forth from the student. But that would only be if you intend this e-portfolio to be something to help students to get a job, once they're finished with the class or their degree, or whatever they're working toward. So that is an e-portfolio in a nutshell. It's just an opportunity for a student to create this. Now, because it is student created, it's often not really an elementary level activity so much as more of a middle school, high school type activity, if we're talking in the K-12 world. Because again, it's student created, and it takes some pretty good technical knowledge and developmental abilities to create, let's say, a Google site website. So what are the goals of ePortfolios? Well, number one is to generate and document learning. And so in the process of students creating these portfolios, they look back on their semester or on their time in the course and reflect upon their learning experience with this. And they hopefully come up, and that in itself is a learning experience. They think back on how they've been learning throughout the semester and what they have learned, and remember some of the concepts that they have been learning. It's also an opportunity for students to make connections. Let's say they're creating a portfolio with multiple assignments in them. Well, they can connect the different assignments, how they connect together. It's an opportunity to reflect upon that as well. So it can be a good learning experience for students to do this. Another goal is to make learning visible. So again, where there was maybe not artifacts or evidence of student learning before, now there might be once a student creates this e-portfolio. And stages and process are important as product. When we learn, oftentimes the process that we take to do it is as important as the product that we create. So students in your class might have created many different products, but they might not have had a chance to think about how those all connect, or what the stages are or processes are that they took to create those projects, or products I should say. So that means that students will think about this, make the learning more visible. Maybe they have over a semester of time really improved in their learning and made changes to the learning, so they have an opportunity to do that during the process of making an e-portfolio. And then finally, to foster student agency. This is an opportunity for students to create their own evidence of their own learning, so it gives them some agency or choice in the matter, take ownership of their own learning. I guess we could call it also intentional learning or initiative. We've talked about intentional learning in other classes where it's meaningful learning. So it's students doing this themselves. So what are the different approaches? Well, there's sort of a continuum between student-centered and class-driven / assessment-driven e-portfolios. And I should mention too that this is more popular. I think this concept of e-portfolios is more popular. You might not have heard about it here because it's more popular internationally, I think, as a way for students to reflect on their learning. But that doesn't mean that it's not useful. I think it just means that it's been more popular in different locations. But yeah, what are the approaches? So student-centered approach means that students kind of create it for its own sake, for the student's sake, and it becomes sort of an important part of the student's life because maybe they're looking for a job in that area or some other reason to show their own learning. And then assessment and class-driven is more the teacher kind of takes the approach. The teacher says you must do it this way. Here are the 5 things that you must include. And I would say that that's the approach that we're taking in this class. Just because it's obviously we don't have the students necessarily that we want to allow to take it, so it's easier just to say we're going to do a class-driven one where you tell them what to include in the e-portfolio. Now, as an instructor, how to make a good e-portfolio assignment, or what to do as an instructor when students have these assignments to do, is to explain the benefits of them to students. Talk about how it can support this deeper learning and these connections and this sense of self. I didn't talk about that too much, but it's really about just making, coming to understand your own abilities and your own qualities as it relates to the course subject matter, because you're reflecting again back on a long period of time of learning and putting it all together in one spot. And then, of course, the benefit of sharing, right? This is an opportunity to share one's work in a nice central location. Obviously, you'll need to establish clear expectations. And that's why the assignment asks you to specify what you want students to put in the portfolio, what pages should there be, and what should be on each page. Provide examples of portfolios to your students if you happen to have some examples from previous classes. Obviously, if you're starting out to do this the first time, you might not be able to have those. Scaffold the learning, in other words, help them to go through it. In my classes, for instance, I have a portfolio that's due in one of my teacher education classes, and so I often will go back to it occasionally during the semester and say, oh, remember how to do this, and remember that this is involved in the assignment. And then assess with a rubric. And the reason why a rubric is probably appropriate is that this is a more loose assignment. It's not probably one that you're going to look for. It's not like a multiple choice test where you're going to look for specific answers, but it's more of an open way to do it. Each student can do it their own way, and so a rubric seems more appropriate for grading something like this. And then make it social. In other words, allow students to share these with one another or share with people outside, because you might as well take advantage of the sharing opportunities for these. So that's just my short little intro on e-portfolios. Here are a couple of examples of portfolios that of the type that could be created. And this one's actually a 4th grade one. I imagine the student had help. And this is the older version of Google Sites that was used, I believe, to create this. So obviously you'd probably want to use the newer version for your own assignment. But we have Caroline's 4th grade portfolio here, and she has social studies, reading and writing, and other. And so what we can do then is find some interesting work that she has created. So a fiction story, for instance, that Caroline has created. Caroline out of Minnesota. She has posted it in Google Docs, which is nice. And this is sharing her work. So it looks like actually that she has created a story, a voice thread hero poem, which means it's a recorded presentation.
Bethany Hamilton, born February 8, 1990, child of Thomas and Sherilyn Hamilton, lived on a sandy beach in Hawaii.
So she made a voice thread about a hero, and there are all kinds of, whoops, I closed that one out. So there are all kinds of different things that you could include, as you can see in this one. This is Caroline's work, and she's obviously been told to create these different elements by her teacher and make sure she shares these on her portfolio over time. And because she created this portfolio, again, it's an opportunity for her to reflect upon her learning. And this is a good example of that, actually, the 4th grade year in review. So what am I proud of for 4th grade? So just a good example of a younger, even though I said this is kind of an older assignment, looks like a 4th grader was able to create this. Another one I should pull up is, this is an example portfolio, but just includes, this is a template. So it's not really a full portfolio or a student created portfolio, but just a template, and it says, okay, there should be a home page. Welcome to your digital portfolio. So you have an About Me page, maybe a goals page, maybe big goals that somebody wants to create, reflections and feedback, gallery with grades or subjects. So maybe you can come up with, this is the teacher saying, well, put what you've created in your grades. What are your passions and what teacher notes you might have? So again, those are some things that you could, this is a teacher who's created a template. That's something you could think about doing as a template that students can go to and review and say, oh, is this the kind of thing that I should create? Or what should I include in my portfolio? It makes it really easy for students to know what to include if there's a template like this. So those are just a few examples to help you understand portfolios a little bit more. And you'll submit this assignment again this week. But remember, you don't have to try this out in a class necessarily. You just need to make sure that there is an assignment there. It tells students what they can use for the ePortfolio assignment. If you want them to use Google Sites, for instance, you can tell them, please create a Google Sites site, which has these pages. Here's how you'll be graded on that, and so forth. But actually implementing it is not required. And I think that's about it. So good luck this week as you begin, and hopefully you're able to submit your ePortfolios assignment.